I'm Pete Sardis with Lawyer You Know. Today, George and I are going to talk about whether you should buy a car or lease a car and how to do it like a lawyer. If you're enjoying this content and you'd like to see more of it, hit subscribe. If you have a specific question that you'd like to see us answer on the Lawyer You Know, leave us a comment down below. We're happy to answer your questions online. But for today, George, let's talk about how you make the decision whether you should buy a car or whether you should lease it.
All right.
What exactly does leasing mean?
Well, leasing means that you don't own the car. Technically, the car is still owned by the manufacturer, but they let you use the car based on, it's kind of like a long-term rental. You really think about it. You pay X number of dollars for so many years, and built into that X number of dollars is an interest rate for them actually letting you have the car. And then at the end of the lease term, they take the car back and then they resell the car. So you don't get to keep the car after however long you lease it. And there are various terms of how you can lease a car.
And really, what's the purpose behind leasing as opposed to buying the car outright?
Well, that's really the decision. That is, do you buy it or do you lease it?
And that's a personal decision, right?
Well, it's a financial one too.
Okay.
I think that, for instance, it is easier to keep track of your expenses on a leased car, for instance, because you pay a set number of dollars. If that leased car is in a business and you use the leased car 100% for the business, then you can deduct the lease payment from the business as a tax-deductible expense. Buying the car kind of comes out the same way, except it's more complicated. You've got to do depreciation, you've got to do, if you're financed it, you've got your payments, your mileage, all that stuff. There is maybe a little benefit to leasing in business, but it's easier to lease.
It's just simpler, right?
Right, it's simpler to lease. And for a person that just wants to make that decision, lease payments are usually less than buying the car and financing.
Right, because you're only paying for the portion of the vehicle that you're actually using.
Right.
I will tell you that from a lease perspective, I've leased cars and I've bought cars, as have you. And it really is a financial decision. You've got to look at the numbers. I find that if there's a car that I want that I'm not sure if I'm going to keep for more than a few years, I'm probably more apt to lease it than I am to buy it. Because it seems to be easier just to lease a car for a couple of years, give it back and be done, than it is to buy it and have payments over a lot longer period of time.
I've got two personal horror stories on leasing,
Okay.
which is why I don't lease anymore. But again, it's a strictly personal decision. Number one, I leased a car one time and I hated it. But I couldn't get rid of it because I'm locked into a 3-year lease and I had to make those payments. So I ended up keeping it, but I didn't like the car, so I couldn't get rid of it. If I'd owned it, I could have gotten rid of it. The other is I leased a car, and I remember what it was. It was the first Infiniti Q45. And at the end of the 3-year lease, I was so in love with this car. I wanted to keep it, but the lease was up. And what they wanted for me to keep the car was an outrageous price that I wasn't willing to pay, and therefore I had to give up a car that I loved. So those two opposite stories made me want to own the car. So if I wanted to keep it, I could keep it. If I wanted to get rid of it, I can get rid of it.
Which is a good spot to talk about what the lease payment is actually based on. And what George was just talking about regarding that Infiniti was there was an issue regarding residual, right?
Right.
All right, definitions. Residual value is important if you're going to want to lease a car because that is the amount of money that you believe, or that the dealer believes, the car is going to be worth when you bring it back from your lease, right?
Right.
And that number, frankly, for a lot of cars is pretty identifiable, right? Unless you're getting something outrageous, the average people's cars will know what the residual value is.
Well, now they tell you. When you lease a car now, they'll tell you what is the residual value at the end of the lease.
Can you negotiate the residual value?
You can negotiate the lease. I don't know if really the residual value is negotiable. For instance, this just happened. I went with a friend who was going to get a Toyota Corolla. And they did all this stuff, blah, 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 and they told him the lease is $250. Now, that is just absurd, because I figured out how much that payment would be. After the 3 years, he's almost buying the whole Corolla. So we walked out. As we're walking out,
The game gets played.
Yeah, and eventually ended up at $180 a month.
And when I say the game, look at video number 2 in this series, and we'll talk about the dance and the ballet that happens in car dealerships.
You can negotiate the lease payment just like you can negotiate the price of the car. And once you get, by the way, that bottom line, the $30,000 I was talking about in the last video, once you get the out-the-door price, that's a good time to negotiate the lease payment because they'll base the lease payment on what that out-the-door price is. And when we talk about the residual value, just to give you an example, let's say you're buying a $30,000 car. End of the 3 years, they may say the car is worth $15,000. Well, if you want to buy that car, you got to pay $15,000. But if you go on Car Gurus, the same car you may be able to buy for $12,000. But they're going to try to sell it to you for $15,000. And so they'll take the car back because they've got ways of depreciating it and playing with it, and they'll resell the car somewhere else and make their money. So that $15,000 is what they base what your payment is going to be so that they don't lose money during a period of time. Plus, again, built into there, and they'll tell you, it's a funny way they do it, but they'll tell you what the interest rate is during your 3-year lease.
And we keep saying 3 years because I think that's the standard, is normally between 3 and 4 years on a car. But you can lease a car for a year, right? Or 2 years.
Absolutely.
And depending on how long your lease term will dictate how much that payment's going to be. Normally the sweet spot is somewhere between 36 months and 40 months. You see a lot of 39-month leases now. So that's kind of the sweet spot where it makes sense. But there's one more part to that. Just because you negotiate the lease payment doesn't mean that you're done with the cost of this car, right? Because you have to make sure that is your maintenance included. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. You have to also know what the lease turn-in costs are going to be. You want to talk about lease turn-in costs?
Sure.
All right.
Well, one of the things also, your lease is negotiable by the number of miles you think you're going to drive in a year. Sometimes there's a lease that only gives you 10,000. You can get a lease that gives you 8,000 miles a year. So if you go over 8,000 miles in that year, they're going to charge you an outrageous amount of money for every mile you went over that 8,000 miles. So you've got to be very careful when you're looking at the lease. And we talked about the documents. We're still in the finance manager's office. Mm-hmm. You make sure you read every document and it says exactly what that salesman and that sales manager told you it was supposed to say as the bottom line. So when you're leasing, the number of miles you're going to drive a year is an important factor in what you're going to pay, because you'll pay a lower amount for a lower monthly payment if you're only driving 8,000. You'll pay a higher amount if you're driving 12,000 a year. And when you turn the car in, pay another thing they stick with now. Almost every lease has a fee that they charge you when you turn the car in now.
And it's not a small amount of money.
No, like $500 or something. That just to turn the car in, you got to pay them $500. Plus, if you went over the mileage, they'll charge you an outrageous amount of money per mile past the amount you contracted for.
Now, truth be told, if you are loyal to a specific automobile brand and you lease cars one after another, and there are a lot of people that do this, most of the time the dealership is happy to waive the mileage overage and
loyalty
and the lease turn-in, right?
Right.
They'll normally negotiate that away to get you into that new car because obviously they get credit for that new vehicle.
But one of the things we really haven't talked about too is whether you buy a car or lease it. The real comparison is the length of time. That's a really important thing. If you keep cars for a long time, leasing is not a good idea. You are better off buying. And the other thing, the bottom line is here too, you are always better buying a used car financially.
Yeah.
There is just no doubt about it. You buy a 1 or 2 year old car, cars really hold up well now. They're built better than they ever were. You are better off and you're going to save a ton of money. You may save as much as 20% on the cost of a car just because you buy a 1 or 2 year old car.
Because the person that bought the car actually ate the depreciation,
Right.
Another technical term, meaning the loss of the value of that vehicle, right?
Right.
And they eat that, which means when you buy a used car, especially if you're buying a certified car, you may actually be in a better position buying a certified car used than you would be
Right.
buying it brand new.
Yeah, I always buy, I can't remember the last new car I bought. I always buy a 1 or 2 year old car because I just can't throw away the amount of money that I'm saving on buying a 1 or 2 year old car.
So really the question is dollars, right? You've
Right.
got to make a decision and you've got to sit down and think about this. And it's not that hard of a calculation. You know what the car is going to cost you. You know how long you're probably going to keep the car. If you love the car buying experience and you want a new car every 3 years, chances are you're not going to make money on buying your car unless you're particularly savvy.
If you're buying it new, right?
Right. But if you're going to keep the car and you're going to keep it long term, you may make sense to finance it over a longer period of time and just keep it. It really is just a matter of adding up the payments and looking at how much money you're spending, adding the interest rates compared to buying it new versus buying it used, because a lot of times, 0 interest for new cars, maybe 2.5% for used cars, same thing on a lease.
But never look at it as a monthly payment.
Yeah.
Always look at it as, what is this car going to cost me total to own this car? Because the monthly payment can be misleading to you. Look at what it's actually going to cost you to the whole term.
And let's talk about that, because the monthly payment is misleading and the dealers love to play that game. What do you want to pay every month? And I'll make this car work in your budget. You maybe finance this car for 120 months, but I'll make it work for you.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is, you don't care about what that monthly payment is. Why? Because you can make a lease term or a finance term, you can change it to make that monthly payment fit.
Yeah.
And the dollars won't add up.
And they'll also go, hey, how about this add-on? It only costs you $2 a month. But $2 a month for 120 months, you're paying a lot of money for probably something like a pinstripe. So be careful. Look at the total cost of the vehicle to lease, buy it, not the monthly cost.
Yeah. And again, you should be looking at our video number 2, which talks about how to, balance one dealership with another. You should always be communicating with more than one dealer when you do this, right?
Right. And again, you leave the finance office, you're going to sign a whole bunch of documents. Make sure you get a copy of everything you sign, and make sure you read everything before you sign it. And then you walk out, and hopefully you'll enjoy your car that you just enjoyed negotiating for.
We hope you enjoyed this video. We hope you enjoyed the whole series. Again, if you liked it, please hit subscribe below, hit the like button, let us know what your thoughts are in the comments below. If there's any specific questions you have, let us know what they are. Again, put them in the comments section. We always answer them. We're happy to do it. Enjoy yourselves. Happy car shopping.